Mr. Chair, do you want to take questions on the way through or at the end?
Well, we're just
well, I'm finished really. Perhaps
there,
what I was going to say, so I'm happy to take questions now.
Oh, I just wonder, with relation to point 8.3, the 9% increase in combined local authority expenditure, is that figure within the bounds of acceptance of the Auditor General? Is there any problem with that kind of level of expenditure?
Well, I can't speak for the Auditor General, but I'm assuming that they've signed off on all 5 LTPs. So, each of them might only be 1.5%, for example. So, a real increase. So, I suppose if you're looking over the 5 councils, it is within the level of acceptability.
Other questions? Councillor Gilbertson.
It's slightly not off the subject. Has anyone made any attempt to estimate the cost savings to the community by dealing with one authority? And what we're saying here, you can save X amount of dollars through various scenarios. What you're not saying is that if Joe Bloggs has to only deal with one council as opposed to the CHB District Council and Regional Council, either whether his house site's 3 feet above the flood level from 1880 and it goes back and forth for a year and costs him $15,000 on his sanity, there's no sort of... There's no one's made any attempt to put a figure on that for...
So we're talking emotional quotient here or cash?
No, I'm talking about the fact we spent $1 million on forests that CHB Council said we didn't need to use. So there's $1 million that you could argue was unnecessary expenditure that wouldn't have resulted, but that's presumably not captured in here.
Not specifically, but one of the requirements that the Local Government Commission does have to look at when they're looking at, defining what is better local government is simplified planning processes. So that's another component of their analysis. This is really just looking at, I guess, at the cost efficiencies, but it is another aspect.
So this is direct rather than indirect costs. Absolutely direct costs.
Yes.
And there are indirect costs that should be considered.
Yes.
Councillor McGregor.
Ms Lambert, we just go to point 8.5, and it relates to the Auckland experience with rates. The first sentence relates to the change in the rating system to get commonality between the ingoing bodies, and in that case you've got winners and losers, and the losers make a lot of noise and the winners remain silent. But you can have that situation without amalgamation. And the second sentence relates to potential savings. Well, I can't see that there's any relevance, even though the change in the rating system is a consequence of amalgamation. It's not relevant to potential savings. Could you just sort of comment on that? I just can't get a connection between those two.
Okay, so this is these 4 lines are taken out of the Winter Report. And it's in the executive summary at the start. What he's saying, or what I think he's saying, is that, and what he's saying is that the cost of that to, let's call them the losers, the ones that have to pay more, the cost of that shift is far more significant than any savings that could be made by having just one council. To that person, that's what I'm saying. It's not going to apply everywhere. Well, that's what I think he's saying. But for some ratepayers, it will be more significant. Yeah.
Can't see that necessarily relevant to efficiencies that are going to be gained. But I take
yeah. I mean, and the other point he makes is that in that case is that while these savings have been identified, the other thing from the Auckland experience is that they are not necessarily directly transferable to rate decreases, that it may just involve an increased level of service, for example.
Which is all benefit. Councillor Rem as well.
Mr Chair, and just following up my earlier point about Mr Winder, and given that this is a really important and interesting report, what do you think about the idea of council hosting a public meeting, either perhaps chaired by yourself or perhaps an independent chairman, with Mr Winder there as a forum for disseminating the information and possible discussion and sort of open to the public?
quite comfortable with that. The only thing I would say, though, is I still haven't had a chance to have a meeting with the other mayors, or with the mayors, I should say, and their chief executives, and it's annual plan time is very hard to get a day in the calendar. So the only proviso I'd add to that is really need to have that discussion first and just see where those guys are at. But I'm well open, yeah, whatever. Any other questions, Councillor Rose?
Well, I was just going to ask Mr. Lambert around 7.10, detailed design of new council not attempted.
Your meaning with the detailed design, the physical, your geographic structure of the new councils, is that what you mean?
No, more in relation to the number of staff, for example, and the types of functions that each of those councils would carry out.
So, Mr. Lambert, that would again have a direct implications as to cost, would it not?
Oh yes, yes, it will be part of the input of costs. Yes, yeah.
Further questions, Councillor Douglas?
Mr. Chairman, I just don't. I'm actually with Councillor Rimsel on this. We need to get Mr. Winder here. I mean, probably here first, because I mean this council has its own view too, and then the public meeting I think is a good idea. But if I look at the savings on a scenario A, they come in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major areas, and inside in the document he says these are subject to. There's caveats right through, and I actually think it's quite interesting. All 3 scenarios. But it'd be helpful if these could be expanded on how they arrived at them, because with the caveats it worries me, because in fact it's within the margin of error, but equally it could be the margin of error of the other way. They could be better. And I think we need to see that.
Okay.
It's a good question. Well answered over here.
I haven't got a question, but I've got a recommendation crafted. I wondered if I was allowed to read that out. That might...
You actually want to make a decision at council around this?
Yeah, well, what I've said that the council receive this report and then instruct staff to invite Mr. Winder to Hawke's Bay, either via Skype or in person, that need or need not go in, to discuss the report with council, perhaps, and that would allow us then to have the discussion with Mr. Winder, because I think Councillor Douglas and Councillor Remerswell are quite correct. It's to get the best out of it.
So if there's no more questions, Councillor Gilbertson, happy to second that. Do you have a question? Councillor Remerswell.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, this report seems to focus largely on the economics and the dollar value. How are we going to gauge the view of the people, or of actually the best participatory democracy process? How are we going to look at whether people actually feel engaged, with their councils, with their communities of interest, etc.? Because I'm just a bit worried that with the focus on the dollars, that's missing out of the equation.
Absolutely. Any thoughts, Ms.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, to be fair to Mr. Winder, he was only asked to look at the financial aspects of it, given that appeared to be, quite a significant part of the first part of his report. I guess in relation to the first part of your question, I mean, I'll go back to the Local Government Commission sitting here this morning, and they have indicated that they're going to be at various steps along the way in this process coming back to re-engage with this community and get their views, and really they're the ones that are going to have to make that assessment and ultimately make their recommendation to the back to the community.
And you're quite right, Councillor, that there are big opportunities in that discussion. So, I mean, we'll play our part, whether it's through, whatever a public discussion with Mr. Winder, but in reality, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There could be some change out of all this stuff. So,
Mr. Chair, could I also ask if Councillor Rose will perhaps think about, as well as a council inviting Mr. Winder here to talk to us, we explore with your interaction with the other mayors, the idea of how to formulate a public meeting.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to go into. I think staff and yourself are quite capable of handling that without it going into a formal resolution.
Councillor Dick, did you have a question?
No, I've got a comment.
Okay, well, let's move. Do you wish to speak?
you want me to read it again?
Read it again, and then it's been seconded by Councillor Gilbert.
The Council received Part 2 of the Prosperity Report. There's the name of the report.
The microphone, please.
And I thought I turned it off instead of on. The Council received Part 2 of the Prosperity Report and instruct staff to invite Mr Winder to Hawke's Bay via Skype or in person to discuss this report with councillors.
Take out the Skype, I think.
Yeah, well, I think...
You wish to speak?
Well...
It's been
no, really, I think it's a good idea, Mr Chairman, to have Mr Winder here. I put Skype in because Councillor Gilbertson would have if I hadn't.
And he has seconded it.
So I don't mind. I think in person probably is far better. But I think Councillor Remerswell and Councillor Douglas are quite correct. To get the best out of this report, we need the author here to be able to question and probe him.
Councillor Gilbertson.
Is this my one chance to speak?
But you could reserve your right if you're a canny politician.
Well, all I was saying, Mr. Chair, I fully support this. I agree that trying to get into Skype was far too modern and innovative, and it would probably cause panic and we'd all go nuts. Just a general comment about the report and the whole thing is that one of the most important bits of it is at the end, which says there is potential savings in overheads and back office through shared services. However, to date, there have been little progress at the scale that would be required to deliver the potential savings. And I think that's probably the saddest thing in the whole report, because basically I believe the best thing for Hawke's Bay is the existing system with a really efficient shared services. That's never going to happen. Historically hasn't happened and will not happen. So the second best option is amalgamation, and that will mean that the simple folk of Paronga, Hau, Tipahui and the wonderful people of Frasertown will definitely lose representation. So I'd certainly support the report and the thrust of it and the savings. And the other thing I make is it doesn't matter what sort of system we have, if we don't get good representation and smart, intelligent people, and maybe something like a finance committee and Skype one day, it doesn't matter what system we have, the results won't match the expectation. And I go back to MMP, where we thought MMP would bring in a whole new generation of brilliant, creative, wonderful people, and the country would change, and we got the same old. So as I say, the most important thing is the people, not the system. But I certainly think this is a step forward at last, and I wonder if Mr Winder's fee could be discounted for lateness.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, Mr Chairman, in my view, it's a useful report, but with limitations, and the limitations were placed on the brief that he was given. No surprises. The savings under those three scenarios, 1 to 3.5% within the margin of error. But what they don't take into account, what they don't cost, is the loss of local democracy, the loss of self-determination by our individual communities, the loss of local leadership, a urban centricity that would be the ultimate outcome under at least two of those scenarios, and consequently the loss of a rural focus and voice. So if you just look at numbers alone, then you're not looking at the essence of what you need to consider when you're talking about local government reform.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. This is a very interesting report, and it has to be read in conjunction with Part 1, which was looking at prosperity of the region and the biggest drivers of that. What this has come out and said is actually the savings are far more modest than had first been predicted or have been bandied around. And I think the point that is very interesting is made in the third to last paragraph of the entire report, that the most significant areas of savings prompt the obvious question as to whether the equivalent savings could be achieved in other ways. And it may be possible that we can have a win-win out of this and do better with everything. The litmus test to me out of this is there a will of the other councils? And if we look at the final paragraph, it'll be interesting to look at the progress made by LAS in achieving some savings for this area as to whether those participant parties are serious about savings or have a different agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas.
Mr Chairman, I think it's a useful contribution to the debate nonetheless, and I'm not saying Councillor Scott was saying it wasn't, far from it. But the other part we have to put together is the Local Government Commission have made it very clear that they can substitute their preference for any of the responses or even the application. And I think this helps in that discussion quite well. If I can just digress slightly, and Councillor Dick is probably, I think, looking around the room, the only one that can go back so far and to 1989, which was a brave new world. And initially there were savings. They varied from quite modest ones to quite significant ones, where people put together, for example, waste management contracts and saved millions. In other cases, they it had already done that or whatever and saved very little. But they dissipated within a matter of 3 years. And that's the problem that was being identified, that it's about, which Councillor Gilbertson did, it varies. And if I can take you then to Victoria, where I ended up, and then into New South Wales, and hit amalgamations in each case. Everywhere I went, I ended up being amalgamated or whatever. The same sort of scenarios occurred. In fact, what I think is the debate about the dollars or whether my rates will go down is actually an arid debate. It's actually what the new council will spend their money on is really what happens. What the debate has to be about is what is good local government and what is responsive, accessible and all that sort of stuff. And that's not in this report or any other report at this stage, but I gather the Local Government Commission may start addressing some of that, and I think that's where the rubber hits the road. When we did some work in the Chamber of Commerce in terms of the cost of two councils, that's Napier or Hastings, where you were having to submit to two district plans, it was estimated the cost on individual businesses could be as much as 20% higher than going to a single plan. So it wasn't 100%, but it was certainly at least 20%, because many of it you could just cut and paste. But that's a significant amount on business, and that's Councillor Gibbonson's point, that the actual benefit sits somewhere else. But that can be solved either by amalgamation or by solved by one district plan, which we still haven't got. So there are different ways, and I think right through this process the Commission's going to have a pretty hard task, because local government in Hawke's Bay is quite a well spread out entity, as opposed to Auckland, which is actually, funny enough, quite a tight, compact area of adjacent towns. But I think this is really good, and I think it'd be better when we see actually how they derive those figures, and then the Group Manager Operations, Liz, has pointed out that you can actually use the model now. And I think that's a really helpful thing. If we can run some other scenarios in there, because I think sitting in there is a win, and I'm confident we've got to do this.
Thank you. You wish to sum up, or you wish to speak?
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, I support the resolution and with the amendment, or the addition rather, to it, but it makes I'm easy about that. As far as I'm concerned, this report tells me everything I want to know. It's authoritative, and the findings of it are in line with my hopes and expectations. I'm quite happy with it.
Thank you. You wish to sum up?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was good to have the initial discussion, but as I said, I'm sure the real discussion and the real probing will come when we have the author of the report here with us. But indeed, it's, as many councillors have enumerated, it is a useful addition of material to the debate, which is going to no doubt dominate the life of Hawke's Bay very much through the next 12 months. So happy to move the resolution.
Thank you. I'll put that motion, and all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried.